Okay, before I get started tonight sharing with you my personal journey with clay, I must extend my heartfelt gratitude to Cuesta College and Emma Saperstein for giving me this remarkable opportunity. Every artist dreams of receiving an email out of the blue offering them a solo show. And that dream email arrived in my inbox in January of 2019. Working with Emma Saperstein in preparation for this exhibition has exposed me to an intelligent, gracious, and accommodating curator and gallery director. Thank you, Emma. I'm pleased to share that I have family here tonight who have traveled far and wide from Massachusetts, West Virginia, Texas, and California to love and support me at this opening. Your presence means more to me than words can express. Thank you, family. Finally, to all of you who hold art in such high regard as to set aside time in your week to share this evening with me, I thank you. Having been born and raised in Southern California, being here has felt like a homecoming of sorts. I've been surrounded by familiar light, shapes, and scents. I have been charmed and warmed by your community here, and I'm beyond grateful for the genuine kindness and hospitality I've received. Tonight I will be sharing with you my creative journey with clay and the various ahas that have brought me to where I am today. While I have experimented with other mediums in my life, clay is the only one that stuck with me. For me, it has become my greatest teacher, silently providing insights into life through the metaphors it presents to me during the making process. I have met many people who tell me that they find me to be rather zen. I'm certain I must have been holding a piece of clay at the time. Certainly, had they met me 15 years ago, they would have a different impression. I truly believe that by sitting at the feet of this timeless, earthbound medium, I am, in essence, returning to my true self. And now, let's start at the very beginning. I was 5 years old when I had my first encounter with clay. And this is the result: a slab-built figure loaded with canvas impressions. And perhaps the most endearing thing about this figure is that she is bundled up and ready for a snow day, an experience of which the maker had no knowledge since I was born in Long Beach and raised in San Diego. It could be that I was preparing myself for my future life in Chicago. 27 years passed before I worked with clay again. And in between, I held art club in my garage throughout elementary school and eventually made my way to art school, determined to become a graphic designer. When I discovered sculpture, however, I had a mental tug-of-war when it came to declaring my major. And practicality got the better of me, and I majored in graphic design and minored in sculpture. Upon leaving school and entering the professional world, I promptly forgot about sculpture, and I poured all of my creative passion into graphic design. And here's a good story. I went to lunch with a peer at my first professional job as a graphic designer. The world was our typographic oyster, and we were so excited about being designers. "Tell me," I said, "what is your favorite thing about graphic design?" To which he replied, "Brochures. Brochures are awesome." And he expounded on the qualities of the trifold brochure. "How about you?" he said. My eyes brightened as I said, "Positive and negative space." It was clear just a few short weeks into my career as a graphic designer that I would ultimately make my way back to sculpture. However, I spent the next 8 years working diligently as a graphic designer. and found out that what I'd hoped to be a creative outlet for me became a creative drain. At that point, I shifted my focus in that industry away from design and toward production and realized I needed an outlet for my creativity. And so I took a pottery class. My sole intention was to make a set of nested mixing bowls, which I still have not done. Regardless, for the next 5 years, I made functional pottery. But in doing so, I approached the vessel from a sculptural perspective, considering forms in relationship to one another and always keeping my eye on the negative space between them. At this point, I started calling myself a potter and spent every moment available to me in a local community clay studio. At one point, a good friend approached me and invited me to be a vendor at the holiday sale at her kids' pre-K school. I felt like I should make something that was relevant to children. And so, along with the horde of mugs, bowls, and casseroles, I made little square rattles. Which brings us to my first aha. It doesn't have to be useful. I had so much fun making these rattles that I started imagining a whole wall covered with these inflated little palm-sized forms. And after convincing my practical self that I could make something for the sheer enjoyment and beauty of it, I made 104 of them. At this point, I stopped calling myself a potter and instead called myself a Sara Mist, with one foot in the functional world and the other in the non-functional. This obsession with making the same thing over and over again did not stop. To commemorate my 40th birthday, I made a little pink pillow for each month of my life, 480 pillows, each with a message inscribed on the inside wall of the clay. The small pillows continued, creating a whole body of work. This piece here is a calendric representation of the birthday of someone who was born on a Tuesday, on the 14th day of the month. Truth be told, in any community studio, there will be some persons who get along and others not so much. I had the pleasure of not being liked by Joanne Trestdale, and I really owe my transition from Sara Mist to sculptor to Joanne and her irritation over my obsession about making the same damn thing over and over again. When she walked by me at my work table and said, "Are you still making those pillows?" To whom I responded, albeit internally, with, "You want to see a pillow? I'll show you a pillow." I went from this big to that big in making my point, and I made 37 of them for my first noteworthy solo show at the very same art center that held the community clay studio that Joanne and I worked alongside in. These pillows hung in a singular, long line down a 90-foot hallway that Joanne had to walk through for 3 months to get to the studio. This piece is a testimony to success being the sweetest revenge. The process of making these pillows was a magical experience. Each one of these pillows was hollow and fluffy until I had 37 different individuals rest their heads in them to take their unique impressions. Each person laid down on their pillow as they would if they were going to sleep. So some of these are the backs of people's heads, while those of the side sleepers include ears and the occasional shoulder. Many of them capture fine hair and 5 o'clock shadows, each of them reflecting their subject at their most vulnerable. A fun note, in order for these pillows not to pop while I was taking the impression, I had to drill a hole that was about 1/4 of an inch in diameter at the top of the pillow before the person laid down in it. When they laid down in it, I would pump my finger over the hole to let air out gently until I was happy with the depth of the impression, after which I would have the person maintain their position in the pillow, not give me any more pressure, and then I would blow back into the pillow and the clay would fluff back over. I mean, it was pretty cool, very magical experience. Needless to say, these could not be made in a community studio where I was allotted a space that was maybe about that big. At this point, I started my own studio. I'm currently in an old warehouse that has been converted to individual artist studios that is about a mile from my house. In the photo in the middle, on the horizon line, you can just make out the spires of a church. Maybe you can, I don't know, it's kind of difficult. But my house is just 3 blocks from that church, so I can essentially keep my eye on my neighborhood. Not to mention, I get a front row seat to some of the most amazing sunsets. And I have to tell you, I mean, many times I will be in the middle of making work, and I'll look up and I'll see this sunset, and I'll be like, really? Like, I'm in here making, it's like something beautiful, you know, and like this is happening. It's amazing. Okay, so these 2 ahas, upside down is right side up, and imperfection, came to me through the same piece. This piece here, called Don't Get Too Discouraged, it's the first piece that I truly listened to in many ways. First, this piece was intended to be oriented the other way, so that the curve on top was going to be a rocking base, and the 2 feet were actually going to extend to be 2 pointy spires to mimic the church that I see out my window. I rotated it simply to refine the bottom, and in doing so, I said, oh, well, what do we have here? And I realized that I needed to stop and accept that the piece was pretty beautiful the way that it was, until, of course, I fired it. And when I fired it, it came out of the kiln with gratuitous cracks, seemingly flipping me the bird. So I put it at the back of my shelf with the intention of taking a hammer to it when I needed to clear up the shelf space. But a few months later, an art consultant came into my studio for a studio visit, and in preparation, I had put all of my good stuff out on the table, all of the stuff that I was proud of. And she looked at it graciously, and then, like any good art consultant, she said, "Can I go through your shelves?" And I said, "Sure." And she pulled this piece out, and I immediately started apologizing. I know, it's horrible. The cracks, they're horrible. And she said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "The cracks, they really do enhance the form." And they talk about like the violence of going through the kiln. And anyway, it completely changed my perspective. Up to this point, the piece had not been named. I mean, you don't name something you're going to kill. Everyone knows that. But at this point, I decided to name it. And I named it Don't Get Too Discouraged. Now, this piece is named essentially by my patron Saint Maud, okay? This is Maud from Harold and Maude. If you haven't seen it, you should. As far as I'm concerned, it's Holy Writ. And it's something, I don't watch movies over and over again, but this is a movie that I'll go to on a regular basis, and it always leaves me with a, oh wow, that was a good one. Anyway, she's stolen the car of some priest. And after doing so, she has drawn a mustache, I think, on the St. Christopher medal that's hanging from his rearview mirror. And he approaches her, and she says to him, "Well, did you like what I did to your St. Christopher medal?" And he says, "I did not." And she looked at him and said, "Don't get too discouraged. For aesthetic appreciation, always a little time." So after I made that piece, I came back and went ahead and made the piece that I had intended to make. So it was good. It was kind of like a 2-for-1. And there you go. That's the zoom in. That's the church right outside my window. But again, this aha combined the imperfection aha. And this cracking continues to make a presence in my work from time to time. This piece is a piece that I made considering a good friend of mine who had 2 mastectomies. These forms came out of the kiln poetically telling her story. There's such a violent quality to the cracking, and yet the work is so profoundly beautiful. It's a perfect example of the kiln not only having the last word, but making the work even better than it was before going in. I've explored this next aha, the unknown as collaborator, in a myriad of ways. I've found that with my forms being so controlled, in order for them to truly come alive, I need to incorporate an element that I cannot control, an element that in truly having the final say leaves me feeling humbled, mesmerized, and as if I am channeling something greater than myself. This piece was fired electrically, and electric firing is pretty much WYSIWYG. And so to introduce the unknown, I worked with a glaze that is difficult to control as it melts. The glaze that was put on this piece was at just a third of what you see on the final piece. The tip of this piece was dipped into a bucket of glaze such that it had a very hard horizontal line, which now is completely lost with the glaze having crawled down the form. Introducing the unknown has also been achieved with additives in my clay. This piece was made with a clay that had a good amount of grog. Grog is basically hard particles of pre-fired clay that kind of look like sand. In forming and refining the form, these particles get caught at the edge of my tool, creating scarring that record the moment of the making on the surface of the piece. At times, I incorporate perlite into the clay, the white stuff that you see in potting soil. This burns out in a high-fire kiln, leaving pock marks that create a surface similar to cement. Another way I work with the unknown is through firing in an atmospheric kiln. Atmospheric kilns use a combination of wood, salt, and soda to affect the atmosphere in the kiln, creating natural glazes in the firing process. So the piece that you see here was unglazed and completely uniform in color when it was put into the kiln. This was a wood-fired kiln that this piece was in, and the temperature gets so hot that the silica in the clay on the surface starts to melt and fuse with the wood ash floating in the atmosphere of the kiln, and it makes its own glaze. This piece also tells the story of where the flame hit the form continually as it traveled through the kiln. In this piece, I started to add material that was contextual to me by incorporating small beach pebbles that I harvested from a beach on the south side of Chicago. So this next aha, follow the work, came to me after years of my work continuing to get bigger until I finally heard myself say, I want to crawl inside. At this time, I had been making egg forms, and as you can see in the gallery, I'm still making egg-like forms. And so I began wondering what it would be like to crawl inside an egg. And so I submitted a proposal for a residency at a clay factory in North Carolina, and was both shocked and elated when they accepted my proposal. I had suggested that it would take 3 months, but they offered me a 2-month residency. Regardless, I accepted and figured I would get as far as I could. When Emma invited me to come to Cuesta, I was on my way to this residency in North Carolina to build this piece, Born Again. At the time, I did not know what I would be exhibiting for this show tonight, but knew that I wanted it to reflect new insights received from my residency. I knew I would not be able to transport a 3-ton installation, but I wanted to share the powerful experience I had encountering the resonance of my own voice and the thoughts and feelings it evoked. And so I decided to make 12 pieces that could do that on a smaller scale. Sorry about that. We've got an extra slide just to blow up, give you an idea of how big this little monster was. In building this form, I imagined that once inside the interior, No. This is good. I want to stay here. So when I first conceived of this piece, I was convinced that it would take 2,000 pounds of clay to complete it. The idea of 2,000 pounds of clay blew my mind, but it was conceivable and within reach, much like home ownership and parenthood, from what I hear. Had I known that it would ultimately take 6,000 pounds of clay, I would have been too overwhelmed to attempt it. Ignorance can be the fairy godmother of tremendous growth. In building this form, I imagined that once inside the interior, the resonance of one's voice would be powerful. What surprised me was that on day 14, that's this third slide in from the top, when the walls were only 18 inches high, the form began to speak back to me. I was working in the middle of the piece when someone approached me and asked me a question. When I responded, my whole body quickened as my voice bounced off these low walls in response. I called each person that passed by my workspace to come into the circle and speak. And as they did, I watched the eyes of each of them grow wide and a grin grow even wider, which leads me to my next aha. Sound as form. As many of you have experienced here tonight or will later in the gallery, the sound of form, or more aptly, the sound of your own voice as modified by the form, has a power to evoke and provoke emotions that defy words. Okay. So to collaborate with the unknown, I crushed and incorporated into my clay Chicago common brick that I sourced from teardowns in my neighborhood. This brick dates back to the turn of the 20th century, and each form shows the scarring that is the result of the refinement of the form. I chose to apply this most mundane of clay bodies, terracotta, with 23 karat gold leaf. I see these pieces as both metaphors for the human condition and cathedrals to the individual self. While our flesh carries scars, both seen and unseen, inside each of us is something that is gilded and precious, and we forget this. Daily, we forget this. I made these pieces because I forget this. In sharing these pieces with you, I'm inviting you to join me in remembering the truth of our true selves. To those of you who live here in the community, I extend an invitation for you to come back on Thursday evening, March 26th. Emma had already shared with you that information to witness a compelling and really powerful performance by the founders of your local movement arts collective, husband and wife duo, Ryan and Marcia. Lawrence will be performing a piece that touches on the depths of the human condition in relationship with other. This week I have caught a glimpse of them rehearsing, and I'm eager to return at the end of the month to see it. So I hope that those of you that can will join me. And finally, I would like to leave you with what's next. In the words of my philosophical boo, the mind, once stretched by a new idea, never returns to its original dimensions. It is true. I now want to build bigger. This is my current vision. Imagine the little guy on the right is 6 feet tall. That would make this sculpture about 50 feet wide in diameter and 9 feet high in the center. My ideas are currently beyond the limits of my studio. The work I see before me requires a team of architects, structural engineers, fabricators, and more importantly, patrons. That said, if any of you have connections to sculpture parks and generous patrons of the arts, I would like you to introduce yourself to me later in the gallery. And with that, I'd like to open it up to the audience for any questions or insights you'd like to share. Do you want the mic up?
Just speak
okay.
loudly. Yeah.
I love
Mm.
you have, letting go. I wonder if you just mind speaking a minute about how to know when you're satisfied.
Gee, that's a really good question. Man, starting off with the tough ones. Because I think that that's not really something that you can put into words. It's really been like a process of learning that, to not overwork it. And I think that my advice to any young artist is to not give up. At some point you will stop overworking it, you know? At some point you'll just know when to stop doing that. And sometimes that it comes through someone coming into your studio and saying, what, you were gonna destroy that? That's beautiful. And opening up your eyes to seeing things differently. So I'm sorry that I don't have a prescription for that.
That was great.
Yes.
Thanks for sharing. It's inspiring to hear your story, and as someone, you know, I think there's a lot of us who have done the right thing and become the like graphic designer, especially when you're young and you have to pay off those student debts for the art school.
Yes.
But you know, how can we transition to being an artist later on? You know.
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I also have to say that I'm so grateful, and as my parents are, I'm sure too, that I chose the path that I did, because I own my own home, you know, and I'm able to have a studio, and I still work in the graphic design industry, and I do that freelance, which means sometimes I've got work and sometimes I don't. And when I don't have work, I'm able to go into the studio and be a full-time artist. What has been so good for me about that has been that I haven't been making work that's sellable. You know, I'm not getting anxious and being like, oh, well, people like blue, so let's glaze this blue, or people like things that look like rabbits, so let's make bunny rabbits, you know, to try and put food on my table. So I've been able to allow myself to listen to the work and know where, and go where the work wants to go, rather than where's the money coming in. So I'm very grateful for that. So I think, I guess I would just suggest to you to keep one foot in one world and the other foot in the other. And it might be a bit of a struggle at times, but if you're able to do that, then you can really develop the voice of your work and not have it be clouded by what's going to sell, you know, because ultimately the work that has an impact in the world is work that comes from people listening to their gut and making work that they want to make, not making work that's sellable. And in the end, ultimately, it becomes sellable because everyone wants a piece of that, right? So finding a way to be able to keep a roof over your head and not have to sell out on your artwork. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
Here's it.
Ah.
I'm really wondering, like I went into the gallery and went into that, but I don't know how a deaf person is going to experience their voice.
Right. That's a really good question. And I think that one of the things that I've noticed in going inside is it doesn't have to be the sound of your voice. If you go inside and you tap on the outside of the form, you will feel in your body, you will feel a vibration. It's not something that you will need to hear. It's something that you can feel in your body. So I encourage you to go back in and tap on it, or even have some friends gather around and really, really tap hard to make that form vibrate so you can feel it. Yeah?
Okay.
Okay.
I was going to go back and give it a
Good, please do. Yes?
I really appreciate, I was in there earlier, and I actually tried listening or just being in the form without saying anything. And I noticed it was almost like we talked about it's the energy you feel kind of in the space. I found like a real sense of peace and like calmness in the space. But speaking with other people, you know, you said it's an emotional experience. Some people felt sad or really, I don't know. I felt like I was like, I'm gonna buy one of these. I could go home and take it. Like, it's so nice. But it's just interesting how your energy, you take it in there, you know, and your experiences with that environment.
Right. I really do believe, you know, matter records energy. I mean, we all know that in our own bodies with the whole, with trauma being kept in the bodies for years, and we are matter, you know, and I think I'm really curious to sense how these pods feel after a month of people going in them, you know, as right now they're pretty much virgin pods, you know, and you guys are writing the energy that's in there. So to feel that in like a month, I think is going to be very interesting.
I felt like I could sense that I wanted it bigger in there too, and so it's funny to see that you had it bigger to begin with. So I was curious how it felt for you to condense it into a smaller form, and then if there was any like interesting new discoveries from condensing it.
Well, something was really interesting when in between the stages of actually it not being gilded and being gilded, that made a difference because you can feel in the pods that are gilded, I could feel that it was warmer. Like the gold was just retaining the heat. But in terms of the size, did I feel a difference going from one to the other?
How you felt about the change?
Well, I felt good. I felt good in that I felt like I was able to capture what it is that I felt in the larger one in North Carolina, to be able to get that into the smaller pod. I would like to work bigger, but it's interesting because there are so many unknowns for me of how to do that. I mean, clearly I'm working beyond or my ideas are beyond the capability of my medium right now, unless they were made customized bricks. And of course, this is something on a scale that I would need to have people do this for me. I mean, I found out from the piece that I made in North Carolina, which kind of looks like an anthill, you know? Ants. An anthill is never made by one ant. And I felt that way. After that, I was like, well, next time I do this, I need a lot of other ants because it was exhausting. So there's no way that I would be able to one, build this out of clay or build this by myself. So there are a lot of things that I need to learn and to move forward. Yes.
How do you consider your work fitting into sort of the minimalist conversation? I feel like my personal experience is that genres that it feels pretty masculine, and I feel like your work, not just the work in the gallery, but references that simplicity without the masculinity.
Yes.
And I'm not sure if that's just because you are a woman or what where you feel you fit in that.
Right, that's interesting. And you ask that in such an academic way, I'm a little intimidated by it. But I can tell you that I was in a group show recently, and an artist had seen my work, and he didn't see my name at the time. He looked at the work and he said, wow, that is beautiful. I want to meet this woman, not knowing that I was a woman. And curiously enough, he and I were in the same studio building, but he did not know that I was the person that was creating the work. And I wound up having work on a cart that I was taking out, and he saw the work, and he saw me, and he realized, this is the woman who made the work that I loved. This is the woman, I want to know her. So there is something about the forms that speak to the feminine, and I think that it is the curve. I think that there's a fullness, like even, in this drawing, there's you can see that these outer edges are having a concave sort of quality. There's something that is embracing or womb-like, or that I think sets my work aside from those guys, But at the same time, I do think speaks a very similar language. And my all-time favorite sculptor in the world is Richard Serra. I love that man. And whenever I'm at a sculpture park, I don't care that the signs say don't touch the work. I'm like, don't you tell me that Richard doesn't want me to touch his work, because I know he does, and I do. I touch his work. But what's my point? Oh, my point is that while I was working on that large piece in North Carolina, I had several people come into the space who I had never spoken to before, who said, wow, there's something about this that reminds me of Richard Serra, which I just wanted to cry and hug them and be like, what? So I like to think that I'm on the right path, but in terms of getting bigger, it's just trying to figure out how to do that and maintain that femininity. Yeah. Yes.
I was actually just about to comment on how much this reminds me of a Richard Serra piece. But, it's funny, this isn't a question at all, just really in dialogue with what you're talking about, how even just the drawing is imbued with this feminine kind of essence or essential form, where Richard Serra's forms are so masculine.
I was thinking that too, because he had that massive installation in New York, and
Yes.
I did not feel warm.
Right, right. Well, I think it also has to do with material, because he's working in steel, So if I were to create this in steel, people probably would think that it was a Richard Serra, and I think I would like to have it built in clay and maybe brickwork. I love bricks. Or I don't know, they're 3D printing things like this these days. It could be that this is a form that gets 3D printed. I don't know. Yes?
This is kind of the same way of thinking, I don't know, this is pretty big. What kind of studio equipment, or, I understand the kiln, I don't know, big kiln, this is like.
Yeah, so this wouldn't be built like in a traditional way, like the way that I built the stuff in there, or the way that I built that larger piece. What I would have to do is have individual bricks made that are made to fit the curve, and there are these brick manufacturers where you can make bespoke bricks. And this is something that I would need to get some architects and structural engineers involved in to make some really mechanical drawings and start, talking to people in the industrial brick making world to figure that out. Yeah. Yes.
So what gave you the inspiration for the gold gilding? It's so unusual. It kind of glorifies the space when you crawl in there.
Right. Well, I think that you've honed in on it by the fact of glorifying or sanctifying something. I think that as a society, we have all decided that gold is holy or beautiful, and so I really did want to bring together these two very disparate materials. The humility of the terracotta and this gloriousness of the gold, and like I had mentioned earlier before, I do feel like it's like a metaphor of ourselves, that here we are in these physical bodies that are failing us, but really inside there's something that's so beautiful, and because of that there's this tension. I think that we're always walking with this tension of what we physically are, but knowing that we're something that's so much greater, and how to experience that or really express that in this physical form. It's a conundrum, you know, and I think that we all have that tension inside of us that's pulling, you know. So really just bringing those two things together to convey that. Yeah. Yes?
I'm just curious if you were inspired at all by like the form of like the stupa. It's like a Buddhist like mound, and like the whole thing is like.
Well, I will now. I'm going to have to research it. So
the kind of the form is very similar to yours, and the whole way you interact with it is you kind of walk around it. And so I had thought that these were inspired by stupas.
Interesting.
So I appreciated the irony of like instead of walking around it, you actually go inside of it.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was like this ironic twist. But
Interesting. No, I like that. I will have to look into those. Really, the idea behind this is each of these rings, it's kind of hard to see in this drawing, but each of these rings has just one opening. And the opening itself, the little gateway, would only be like 30 to 31 inches wide. And that, I looked it up, that's ADA, so as long as it's 30 inches wide, we're good. You know, I want as many people to be able to experience this as they can, but the point is to feel some restriction in the space. So we'd have an opening that would just be about that wide, and the channel between each form would be about 3 feet wide, so just a little bit wider than that. So that when you walk in this form and someone's coming your way, you actually have to navigate space with them in order to be able to pass one another. And in order to be able to navigate that space, you're going to have eye contact. And I'm feeling like we are doing that less and less these days. We are ignoring each other when we are in such close space. And quite frankly, it hurts me. So I want to create something where people are forced to, if they're going to engage in this work, they're going to have to engage with someone else that they see in this work. They're going to have to figure out, okay, how are we going to get around each other? And then ultimately, each ring, so the outer ring would be 6 feet high, and each ring that goes in would grow by an additional 1.5 feet, so that ultimately that final form on the inside would be 9 feet high, and the opening might be about 2 feet in diameter, and the base would maybe be about 5 feet in diameter, so that really only one person is going to feel comfortable in there. You're going to wait on the outside to let them have their experience and then come out. But it would have that's a very similar feeling that we're having in the forms in the gallery, a feeling of being held, a feeling of a sacredness. You know, that small opening at the top is very much like an oculus, you know, like the Greek, ancient Greek architecture that would have the eye of God looking down at you, you know, so that concept of like connecting with something greater.
I don't know if this adds to that or anything, but in terms of like where stuff might be coming from, you know that like your typical animal cell model, right? And there's the little organelles, right? This reminds me very much of something that goes around the nucleus.
Oh, interesting.
You know, I forget the thing that it's called.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Okay, we have time for one more question, but I'm not going to force it. If there's not one out there, we can go listen to cello. Okay.
I just was wondering about the significance about using 12 and the orientation of the forms.
Yes. Okay. So, well, you know, I mean, at the very basic, these are very egg-like forms, and most of us encounter eggs in dozens. So I figured that was a good starting point. But really, the number 12, it brings us back to the whole concept of time. You know, we've got 12 months in a year and 24 hours in a day, and even our hours of 60 minutes are divisible by 12. So it really brings back that whole concept of time, and that everything is impermanent. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming out. I mean, did you have anything?